Thank you, Joe. That was a rather long scripture reading this morning. Get your breath down. We are 15 days into this new year of 2012. 15 days. We have had 50 to go. 351 to go in 2012. Now, my guess is that you may have made some resolutions for this new year. They may be formal ones. They may be informal ones. My guess some of you are holding those resolutions. My guess is if you're like me, a few of those have already been broken. Whether it's formal or informal, usually when the new year begins, all of us turn our thoughts to what is it this year that we might do better? Or how might we be better? Or what might we quit that we need to quit? Or what might we start that we need to start? We do cluster our days and our weeks into larger groupings of months and of years and even decades. We plan and talk about our lives based on a lot of those clusters. We say things to each other like, well, last week wasn't particularly a good week, but I'm looking forward to this week. Sometimes we say, this month hasn't been particularly good, but I'm looking forward to next month. Sometimes we say that about years. Sometimes we look at a past year and we say, this is probably the best year of my life. Sometimes we look at the past year and say, this wasn't a particularly good year. We always look forward to the next year and hoping that it will be better. Knowing that that new year will bring joys and sorrows just like the past year. I like reading Phil Anderson in the Capital Journal. He's the religion writer. And usually every Saturday he writes a column on the religion page. I don't know how many of you read his column on New Year's Eve, December 31st, but I found it an extremely helpful column. I want to share a few words as we start, as we reflect on this new year from his column. He says, to me, New Year's Eve is a time of thanksgiving, a chance to look back with gratitude to God for the many blessings I have received, a chance to pause long enough to thank God for my family and all the people who mean so much to me. I thank God for his guidance through another year and for the chance to see the start of another year. I love the freshness, the newness of a new year and a chance to start over again with a clean slate. A new year does offer us a chance, doesn't it, to what I would say call turn over a new leaf. Start again. Do it again. Today, next Sunday, I want to explore how we might get a better grip on renewing and re-energizing and recharging and restarting our lives for this new year. How can we be the best for those who love us? And since we're in church, let's just add to that. How can we be the best for God in this coming new year? Today we're going to focus on each of us as individuals in the first part of the sermon, and next Sunday in part 2, we'll focus on the congregation. Individuals as a congregation, what we might do to turn over a new leaf. But today we turn to ourselves and focus just for a few moments on what it is we might do to make this a better year. How can each of us as individuals have more energy, more commitment to what's important to us, more engagement with the gospel message that's presented, less time wasting our potential and doing those things that really don't help us or others. To put it in the most simple terms, how in 2012 can we be better Christians? How can we be better followers of Christ? To answer the question, we turn to a fellow named Nicodemus. You've heard me talk about Nicodemus before. You may have read about Nicodemus. He's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible. This time in John that Peggy read this morning, he's mentioned as helping Joseph of Arimathea at the entombment of Jesus. And he's mentioned one other time in another gospel. We read from the Gospel of John about Nicodemus some very familiar words. Primary among them are the words about being born from above. Now, elsewhere in the Bible, we see words that are similar to that, like being born again, or being born anew. In this particular reading, we see Jesus encouraging Nicodemus to be born from above. Now, contained within this dialogue between Jesus and John are really some wonderful and helpful words. Unfortunately, the problem with these particular words is that many well-intentioned Christian folk have taken those words as an extremely strict commandment, which has led somewhat to a separation and a division among Christian people. Christian people who see themselves as truly Christian are those born again. And then there's the rest of us. Politicians over the past 10 to 20 years have fed this notion by declaring themselves with a born-again status. I'm a born-again Christian politician. And it separates them, I guess, from just other plain Christian folk. Or it may even imply that only those who claim that status are really Christian. Now, it's easy to read this story and to see how this story about Nicodemus feeds that notion. Because Nicodemus is a very religious man. He's a Pharisee. He knows what to eat properly. He knows when to worship properly. He knows how to clothe himself properly, religiously. He knows which holy days to observe. He knows all the rituals. He knows what to do. He's a very religious man. Jesus says to this religious fellow, he says, there's more. He says, you've got to be born from above. Now, Jesus is telling Nicodemus there's something more to faith than following the rules. That's not all bad. And knowing the rules and knowing how to worship and knowing the holy days and the rituals is not all bad. But there's more to it than that. To truly see the kingdom of God, Jesus says, one must be born from above. Now, Nicodemus gets into this kind of humorous conversation with Jesus, and he questions that in a very literal way. He says, now, I've already been born. How exactly does one get back in the womb of a mother and be born again? Kind of a strange image there, isn't it? Jesus then begins to teach Nicodemus what he's talking about. And he uses terms such as water and spirit versus flesh. And then he delves even deeper with Nicodemus, and he says something about faith that is based on more than what we can understand or know or grasp. And he gives this great example of the wind. I love this example. He says the wind blows, and we feel it, and we hear it, but we don't really know where it comes from or where it goes. We feel it, we sense it, but we don't know everything about it. Jesus tells Nicodemus that heavenly matters cannot really be understood except through the one whom God sent to save the world. When you connect with the one whom God sent, then you begin to sense that these things that are beyond our specific physical, fleshy knowledge that occur in this world and occur in our lives. And Jesus is saying there's a point that you just have to trust. That there's a deeper meaning to it, and that God knows what that deeper meaning is. Jesus says, only through the one whom God sent to save the world can you understand heavenly matters. And only then can you connect with the God who created you, who created us and the world, and who gives us all that we need in life and in eternity. Now for Nicodemus, this is a salvation moment. He is experiencing his relationship and his oneness with Christ, and Christ is saying, there's more than what you're doing. And that more is what really makes sense of everything that's happening to you in your life. Jesus is not so much commanding Nicodemus to be born from above, as he is inviting Nicodemus and inviting us to change the way we approach matters of faith, our lives in relationship to God, and how we view the world. He's inviting us to change our perspective and to think of a different perspective towards life and faith. I like the story of the little boy and his older sister who got on the elevator. The little boy had an ice cream cone. And the ice cream cone, after they got on the elevator, began to melt faster than he could eat it, and it started running down his hands and arms. The elevator stopped at a floor, and a very elegant woman in a full-length fur coat stepped onto the elevator. She turned her back to the children and faced the doors, and the children were behind her. And as the elevator went on its journey, the ice cream began to melt even more, and it began to get all over his hand. And he looked at that fur coat in front of him, and the temptation was too strong. And he began to wipe his hand gently on the coat. To which his sister replied, "Be careful, Billy. You'll get fur in your ice cream." Perspective is a powerful, powerful tool. Sometimes how we see something depends on where we stand. Sometimes how we see whatever happens to us in life depends on our perspective. What Jesus is telling Nicodemus and telling us today is we as people of faith are invited to a certain perspective on how we view life and faith and the events and the occurrences that are part of our life. Where do we stand in relation to God's grace that's shown to us in Jesus Christ? Where do you stand at the beginning of this year? In many ways, we stand in the same place Nicodemus stood with Jesus long ago, asking some of the same questions. I do religious things. I worship, I pray, I'm very spiritual. Is that all there is to it? And Jesus is saying, no, there's more. To be faithful is to gain a certain perspective on all of life. To look at life wherever you go, work, play, home, wherever you go, to have a certain perspective on what is happening around you. That perspective is what connects you with this amazing grace of God and helps us all realize that our life is not gained as a prize that must be won, but it is a gift to be received. It is a life that doesn't focus on trying to acquire lots more stuff, but one that is aware that all we need has already been given to us. All we need has already been given to us by a gracious God. In a moment we'll sing a wonderful hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness." And in that hymn are these words, "All I have needed, Thy hand hath provided." What if we live 2012 with that perspective? That what we have is enough. And that God will supply every one of our needs in this year. Jesus is saying, set your focus above. Connect with something more than just what you understand and see and know. Don't live with your head in the clouds. You've got to live here, and you've got to know what's going on. But don't assume that's all. Don't live so focused on trying to be able to explain every single thing and gain every single thing in life and acquire everything and have every knowledge of everything. Reach that point where you say, I trust in you, God, to get me through this year. I've been thinking about this as we began the new year. There are deeper meanings to events and occurrences that happen in our lives. I've talked to some of you over the past few weeks. Some of you that are dealing with various issues and health concerns. We all ask the question, why? Why does it happen to us? I'm of the understanding and I'm of the belief that I don't particularly think God causes events to happen to us. If you believe that, I certainly respect that. And we can have a good dialogue about that. I do believe, though, that in the events and occurrences of our lives there is a deeper meaning. And that with God, we work out what that is. And we understand it better with God's help. And we, at some point, have to say, I don't know exactly why this has happened or this is happening, but I trust in a deeper meaning. And I trust that God will help me with this and help me even with the things I have to face in the new year. Sometimes I ponder this and I think, why was I born in Kansas in the middle of mid-America and not born in abject poverty in Ethiopia? How is it? Some of us are born here and some of us are born there. As I ponder poverty like they're experiencing in some third world countries, and I ponder as I said in my own life in plenty of stuff and food and everything, I realize that part of my calling is to share what I have. And again, at the beginning of a new year, I really want to believe that this is the year that all of us around the world will realize there is enough air, there is enough water, there's enough food for all God's children. There really is enough. There's enough shelter, there's enough clothing, there's enough money for everyone on this earth to live in comfort. But to make that happen, our perspective needs to change. And life for us needs to become a gift that has been given to us, not earned, not gained, not a prize, but truly a gift. This morning I want to suggest that Jesus in this story of Nicodemus is really inviting you and I to live with the perspective of one who has what we need and trusts that God will supply everything else we need. I want to end with Phil Anderson's words from his column, his last few words on that New Year's Eve column, when he says this: as I take stock of the past year on New Year's Eve, I might hearken back to a few of those difficult times. But mostly I will think about the good things that happened this year. Many of the most enjoyable moments in my own year in review may not have seemed so spectacular at the time. Yet, in the long run, they are the very things that help define the year and are the things that will stick with me down the road. While there is always the unknown, I don't enter 2012 with an ounce of fear. I know the new year, just like my life, ultimately will be in God's very able hands. And in that, I find peace and rest. Would you pray with me?